Welcome to the Explainer. All right, we're diving straight into the deep end today by cracking open some of the most strictly forbidden sealed archives in the entire Imperium of man. We're looking at these deeply fragmented records that suggest humanity once fought a war so catastrophic, and honestly so politically dangerous, that the Imperium chose to do something almost unthinkable. They chose to just forget it. And not because they lost, but because they uncovered a threat that was arguably worse than chaos, worse than the Tyranids, and worse than the Necrons. What we're exploring today is the deeply terrifying possibility that mankind's greatest enemy is actually humanity itself. The official records claim the war never happened. Seriously, just let that sink in for a second. Think about the sheer bureaucratic terror of a completely erased galactic-scale war. There was no victory parade. No triumph was ever carved into the walls of Terra. Not a single Space Marine chapter earned battle honors for this. This wasn't just your standard cover-up. We're talking about the systematic, deliberate deletion of a monumental conflict from the collective memory of the entire human species. Section 1. The War That Never Happened. So this whole mystery begins deep out in Segmentum Obscurus, where prosperous, perfectly loyal worlds just started blinking out of existence. One by one, they went completely silent. And you know the most unsettling part. There wasn't a single distress signal, no reports of a planetary invasion, just absolute silence. So you might be wondering, how do we even know something was intentionally hidden if it was erased? Well, you look at the gaps. We're talking massive missing fleet registries and astropathic archive blackouts that span entire decades. But honestly, the anomalous administratum silence is the real smoking gun here. Think about it. This is a bureaucracy so obsessively detailed that it meticulously tracks the movement of individual grain shipments across the galaxy. In an empire like that, massive absences of data don't prove nothing happened. They actually prove that history was deliberately, painstakingly redacted. Section 2. The Silent Rebellion. Now, when these planets first stopped responding, nobody really panicked right away. But a deeply chilling pattern started emerging among these highly developed, militarily crucial planets out in the dark. Just look at how agonizingly slow this realization was. Month 1, the Administratum just blames routine warp interference, while the Navy assumes the astropaths are acting up again. By year 1, sector governors are literally just pointing fingers at bureaucratic delays. Everyone assumed it was someone else's problem. It wasn't until years later, when an Imperial reconnaissance flotilla finally translated into one of these systems, expecting to find a dead, conquered world, that the horrifying truth actually came to light. Because instead of a dead world, they found something impossible. To quote the archives directly, the world had not collapsed, it had simply left. The planet was thriving. The cities were completely functioning. Agriculture was booming. Orbital stations were fully operational, but the astropathic communication arrays deliberately dismantled. Imperial symbols scrubbed clean, planetary tithes completely suspended. And the absolute biggest shocker, there was zero evidence of chaos corruption, no demonic cults, and absolutely no Xenos occupation. Which brings us to exactly why they left. This whole leaderless rebellion didn't kick off because some dark god whispered in a governor's ear. It started because of deeply relatable, everyday systemic failures. We're talking centuries of crushing taxation, rampant political corruption, administrative neglect, and endless military requisitions. The citizens on these interconnected rebel worlds genuinely convinced themselves that they were the ones saving humanity. They successfully argued that imperial rule consumed civilizations way faster than most actual enemies, making the Imperium itself the true existential threat. Section 3. An impossible conflict. So now the Imperium is facing a problem utterly unlike any other war they'd ever fought. You've got this wild clash of doctrines. The Imperium, of course, relies on brute force, right? Astartes chapters, Titan legions, massive battle fleets looking for a decisive fight. But the rebels turned the Imperium's own tactical playbook entirely against them. Because these rebels used to be Imperial, they understood the logistics, the doctrines, and the glaring weaknesses perfectly. So instead of fighting massive pitch battles, they targeted infrastructure, vanished fuel reserves, and ambushed supply groups. It was a strategic nightmare. And then came the ultimate gut punch to Imperial leadership. It threatened loyalty itself. I mean, just pause and think about the catastrophic reality of that statement for an empire built on blind, absolute obedience. Several Imperial commanders, entire guard regiments, and even warships were willingly defecting to the rebellion. No torture rooms, no warp corruption forcing their hand. They just switched sides. Once you lose that inherent loyalty, the Imperium suddenly realizes that every single governor is a suspect and every officer is a massive flight risk. Section 4. The Collapse of Trust. So the conflict quickly devolves into this grueling, nasty war of exhaustion, and a literal civilization-breaking paranoia begins to take hold. It really begs the ultimate question, doesn't it? Were people rebelling simply because imperial governance had truly failed them? Or were darker forces actually manipulating events from the shadows? The lines between standard human nature breaking down and potential chaos influence completely blurred. Trust, which is literally the only thing holding a galactic civilization together, was collapsing, and it all culminated in a massive fleet engagement near a vital strategic junction. A battle that was supposed to end the war. Literally zero victors walked away from that engagement. Thousands of vessels converged on this junction, but the command structures just completely collapsed. The hidden accounts mention psychic disturbances, impossible signals, and just sheer unadulterated panic. Friend or foe identification systems completely failed. And these terrified fleets simply started blowing each other apart in the pitch black of space, because nobody could determine who was actually loyal anymore. Both the Imperial and Rebel fleets were just utterly shattered. Section 5, the Grand Erasure, and this aftermath builds into an utterly impossible choice for Imperial leadership. Look at it from their perspective. Following the mutual destruction of those fleets, continuing the war risked a total sector-wide collapse, but ending it openly. That risked legitimizing the rebellion and proving to trillions of citizens that independence from Terra was actually achievable. So they chose a third path. Here are the terrifying bureaucratic steps of how a galaxy-spanning empire deletes a war. Step 1. Conduct highly secretive back-channel negotiations with the separatists to just stop the bleeding. Step 2. Administratum workers literally seal records inside vaults, purge the data archives, and painstakingly forge fleet registries. Step 3. Scatter, reassign, or outright execute any surviving witnesses. They literally edited history itself so this systemic failure would never see the light of day. But here's the kicker. Even though the war was erased, the consequences shaped everything that came next. This forgotten conflict fundamentally birthed the extremely authoritarian, rigid Imperium we recognize in the 41st millennium. It drove increased paranoia, massively expanded surveillance, intensified political oversight, and completely stripped away planetary autonomy. Scholars who study these forbidden texts argued that these harsh measures didn't just come out of nowhere. They originated directly from the lessons learned during this hidden war. And it was all driven by this specific terrifying logic. If loyalty could fracture once, it could fracture again. That simple mindset shaped generations of governance. It permanently altered Imperial policy to ensure that absolutely every potential threat was heavily monitored. Every minor deviation was ruthlessly investigated, and any hint, even a whisper, of an independent movement was brutally suppressed before it could ever spread. Section 6, the lingering threat, because here's the uncomfortable truth. The core ideas of that rebellion, they never completely vanished. Fragments of those ideas survived in hidden philosophies and underground texts passed down quietly across centuries. And this frames the ultimate dilemma facing humanity. We always fixate on the external threats, right? The alien invasions, the cosmic horrors, the demonic crusades bursting from the warp. But what if humanity's absolute greatest weakness is internal? What if the bureaucratic paralysis, the rampant corruption, and the systemic repression, the exact tools the Imperium relies on to survive, are actually what's creating the dangers they're trying to prevent? Which really forces us to ask, was the Imperium right to erase the war to preserve stability at any cost? You kind of have to weigh the survival of an entire civilization against the total death of truth. If acknowledging the rebellion would have literally torn the Imperium apart, was the grand erasure just a necessary evil to keep the human species from completely destroying itself? Or did burying the truth just ensure humanity is doomed to repeat the exact same mistakes? By refusing to learn from their own systemic failures, by choosing to double down on repression rather than actual reform, is the Imperium's chosen cure actually its greatest disease? Are they simply trapping humanity inside a decaying machine that is slowly consuming itself from the inside out? And that leaves us with one final, honestly deeply unsettling question to ponder as we close the archives today. Every surviving account of this era contains massive contradictions. Every record tells a slightly different story. If an event this massive, this galaxy-altering, can be completely wiped from existence, was the official story ever the truth to begin with? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the hidden history of the Imperium. Keep questioning the archives, and I'll see you next time.